Carla-Rae plays one of the Elaine Spears in the film Bones of Crows, which is shown tonight at 7:30. So please, if you can get in, please do make that film. Next to her is Ernest. He is a Ute Mountain Ute, former executive director of the Carla-Rae Commission of Indian Affairs, working with Governors Hickenlooper and subsequent governors throughout his tenure, where he maintained communication between the Southern Ute Indian tribe, the Ute Mountain Ute Indian tribe, and other Native American organizations. And he's a recipient of several awards. Ernest is the great-grandson of Chief Jack House, the last hereditary chief of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, and he is currently the senior policy director for the Keystone Policy Center. And next to Ernest is Helen Gover. She's Diné-Pawnee-Choctaw. Helen is involved with the Levitt Pavilion Center in Denver and the AMRC in partnership with the Denver Indian Center. Helen produced AMRC All My Relations Celebration, a music festival meant to celebrate Indigenous artistry through music, dance, and art by bridging cultural heritage with the contemporary lens. Helen co-founded the Native Indigenous Student Alliance and held positions at Dreamboat Music, LLC, and Whiz Bang Incorporated. When I was talking to Helen, I let her know that Whiz Bang is actually a town in Oklahoma. She didn't know that. So it's an honor to have you guys here. So thank you so much. So Hollywood's relationship with Native Americans is particularly ugly, and that's not a good word, and has lagged far behind the gradual improvement with other marginalized peoples. Until now, for example, Native Americans have had few equivalents to Selma, 12 Years a Slave, Hidden Figures, or Everything All at Once, or even historical fiction such as The Color Purple, Moonlight, and The Help. Unfortunately, we do have an entire genre of films, Westerns. When the scales are tipping slightly, and there's an importance in turning the big lens onto stories largely untold or erased outside of Indigenous communities, as a forthcoming film, Killers of the Flower Moon, is a perfect example of what is happening in those communities. So, when you look at this evolved out of the films Bones of Crows and last night's opening film, Fancy Dance, which are both Native American related films, one contemporary, one kind of contemporary historical with Bones of Crows. So when I look at Bones of Crows, boarding schools, kidnapping, sexual abuse, genocide, all humane and very heartbreaking. Does it seem like Canada is further ahead in telling these as well as other Indigenous stories? So,
what do we do? Address that. I'll address that first.
And we can discuss
sure,
that.
Yeah. That's Let me first ask a question here. How many in this room have any knowledge, basic or in-depth knowledge of, in Canada, the residential schools, and here in the United States, the boarding schools, the Indian boarding schools? Can I see a show of hands?
Oh.
Look at that. That is so
unusual.
It really is, but it's very encouraging to know that there are people that have an awareness of what is not taught to us in schools, in regular school situations. What we know is either passed down through our lineage, or it's a story that's told through our lineage. or there is a family member. We are, Native culture is usually anywhere from 1 to 2 separation of a boarding school or a residential school, survivor or non-survivor. What I can tell you based on the film, Bones of Crows, and the experience that I had working on that film, was everyone on the project was in one accord. They had one mission, and that was to see that this film was brought forth and people could have an understanding of really what is dealt with in the residential schools. It is based on a true story of 4 generations, and I don't want, if you have not seen the film, I'm not going to give anything away with regard to it. I want you to see the film. So with that, I'm just going to tell you this. The production team for Bones of Crows, from director, producers, down through every facet of that production had, as I said, one thing in mind, and was to get the story right, and for people to really see, the reality, the rawness of it, but the resilience as well. So it's not like, there's resilience. And so with that, as I came into the project, there were cultural advisors, there were residential school survivors, there was a chief that was there, and they were there as our physical support team to be there in those moments that things were really tough, really intense. And we would go down, after some scenes, we would go down and just sit in this tent in a circle and cry. And there would be people there to hold us, to smudge us, to pray with us, all the different things that we needed. Now, why do I share that? Because there is generational trauma that gets brought forward in situations like this. And I'm not saying that just, the Indian culture is the only that's ever dealt with generational trauma. You can look at just about every culture that's gone through, and if you would really look at it, every culture is maybe 1 or 2 degrees difference in us all being exactly alike. So why is there such a divide in certain people groups? Why? Why do we go, you are not good enough and you are? Why, you have to be this and you have to be that. And so what I find is my heart right now is leaping because of the hands that I saw that know, okay? Because usually this is such a really hard thing to share, because you get looked at like, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is this has been something that's gone on for generations, and we're standing up and saying enough and no more. This can't keep happening. This can't keep happening. Does Canada have a stronger grasp of this? To a degree, I feel yes. I feel like they are. There is more of just a unity in saying, okay, we're not doing this anymore, and we're gonna be the squeaky wheel, and we're gonna keep talking about this until somebody gets a hold of it. And this is part of what Bones of Crows is all about. Okay, now in the U.S., just as Steve said, we're just getting little trickles of the reality of what's going on. I mean, I've talked to several people here. I worked with Lily Gladstone, the gal that is doing Killers of the Flower Moon with Martin Scorsese. played her mother at Yale in Manhattan, and Mary Catherine Nagel's Manhattan. I got to know her, and I called her last night after seeing Fancy Dance, and I said, you know, I had no idea. Oh my God, girl. And she was like, thank you. And she said, you know, I wish I could have been there, but of course that was a SAG-AFTRA film, so she couldn't be here, you know. So, but I was so honored to be able to see her work and to know that the U.S. is finally getting a hold of. But in that regard, you've got to keep in mind, there's an Indigenous filmmaker who wrote this story, you know, and it's so hard to get into venues with Indigenous films. I don't know why that is. So I am thrilled to be here, and I hope that answered part of your question. I hope you'll come to see Bones of Crows tonight, and then I believe there's a Q&A after.
Yes.
And if you stay, then you can ask me some questions about the film. And I will give you some answers, but I cannot, in good conscience, I cannot give you that. But thank you for those of you who have spent time to get to know us and get to know some of the things we've had to face to be where we are now.
And I think Ernest can lean into
Yes.
that a little bit.
I'm done. I will.
I could just listen to this. I'm happy to listen to both of these. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Kate, for the opportunity. You all welcome me here, but I should really welcome you here. This is traditional Ute land and territory that we're on. And so it's good to come back here. It's good to come back to Summit County. When I saw the film, it was interesting for me because along with some of the other hats that I wear, I've sat on the board of trustees for Fort Lewis College in Durango for the last 10 years. And if you know anything about Fort Lewis College, you know that it started as an Indian boarding school. It was one of 5 here in Colorado, in the state. And it is the focal point. That and the Teller Institute in Grand Junction are the focal point of House Bill 1327 state legislation that was passed last year to look at boarding schools in Colorado and to do a deeper dive. That report will become public in 2 weeks on October 3rd. And it's going to be it's going to provide a lot of light on conversations, tough conversations. But even in the last 10 years, you know, I think to Carla-Rae's point, here in Colorado, I remember last year when Fort Lewis was a big advocate in proposing the legislation. We wanted the conversation to happen. And also, if you know anything about Fort Lewis, it even though it started off with such a very difficult, dark chapter, it has a tuition waiver program for Native American students to attend. So we graduate more Native American students in undergraduate programs than many institutions across the country. Every year, this class is over 150 tribes represented. Over 40% of our student body is Native American or Indigenous. And how do you not only address a dark chapter or attempt to address that and still move forward with this idea of trying to bring back what was removed? Every component that was trying to remove and extinguish from the Indian problem. The Indian problem existed in Colorado. The Indian problem existed in the United States. Westward expansion, manifest destiny, we can point to all these different policies, right? But we were appreciative that the state legislature was willing to move forward. And we actually, right before that meeting in proposing the legislation, we met with the United States Department of Interior. And Secretary Helen had announced the states or the United States process in looking at boarding schools. And it didn't matter where. I mean, it's great that we have, you know, the first Indigenous woman even having that position. But it didn't matter to us at Fort Lewis. We were still going to move forward and bringing light, good, bad, whatever it was, to this conversation. We owe it. And exactly to Carla-Rae's point, you know, every one of us that are Indigenous and have relatives are we're one person removed, if not directly linked to this issue. And I thought the film did such an amazing job in highlighting really the gamut of intergenerational trauma, as you will see. And I think that it's so timely if you're from Colorado, because you will see that conversation continuing and moving forward, because we have a long ways to go. And we can learn so much from what was created from our relatives and First Nations in Canada around the development of truth and reconciliation commissions. How do you move forward? How do you recognize that? And so that's why I'm so appreciative that not just you're here, but the film is being brought here to Summit County, this conversation, and we're continuing to have it. And it needs to be done in other parts of the state that have film festivals. I wish I could take it in some more areas than others where I go visit across the state, because it's information that people need to know.
It's part of our virtual film festival. Right? Yeah. So people can watch it online for a period of time. So from a younger perspective, is that, in your family's perspective, can you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you for having me here today, first of all.
Thank you.
And Carla, I really enjoyed your film and how the cinematography of it, first of all, but how it touched on, as we were mentioning, intergenerational trauma. My family has been through it as well, from our boarding schools down this way, and it's an interesting topic, especially on my dad's side. My grandma went to boarding school, Wheelock Academy, in Oklahoma, and the differences of what became of my grandma on my mom's side and my grandma on my dad's side is, Choctaws are considered one of the 5 civilized tribes of the U.S. And so I've heard differing opinions on that comparatively to the trauma my great-grandma faced in the boarding schools in the Southwest. And so it's always interesting hearing different sides of it and the trauma that's come out of it. But yeah, I would say that intergenerational trauma is still there, but a lot of times I go to CU Denver, so we have a lot of youth movement around these things, and our youth are really willing to put themselves out there and to speak and to educate others on this topic, which is super important, I think. But in terms of First Nations, the Canadian First Nations artists and music, I can kind of speak more in that sense. We had the Lucy Nation perform at the festival I promoted this past August, and one of them is Seneca and the other is Mohawk, I believe. But they also are super huge artists in the scene, and they've been able to shed light on things like this, as well as MMIW, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later. But yeah, I think in terms of artistry and creativity, I think there's a lot of collaboration between First Nations in Canada and here that are really using art as a way of taking, I guess, kind of like a renaissance, I would like to say, about it, with film such as this one. And it's really cool that it's also turned into a mini-series spin-off as well. So continuing that story building of everything. And although it's super heavy and I may have cried a few times during that film, it's important to tell these stories. And so, yeah, that's what I can say about it.
And it's I think I mentioned last night at the film that the amount of Native American history in the U.S. is, pathetic.
It is.
And it's amazing because Native American history is American history. So, thank you. So accurate representation of contemporary Native peoples is critical in the fight against systemic racism and bias towards Native peoples. Invisibility is a modern form of racism, and that is basically what is going on, is this invisibility. So it's important, right, to have that representation regardless of what form of media
It
it's
is.
presented in.
one of the other things that you and I had discussed last night, and I'm going to address this topic with regard to that. Not all people look alike. Not all natives look alike. But that does not diminish who we are, okay? I mean, obviously you can look at us. My skin is lighter, but that doesn't make me any less native. What's happening right now is there are many of us who were raised urban Indian. And for myself, I've done research and gone back through my roots. On my father's side, I'm still working on my mother's side. There was a lot of hidden things back during, my father was World War II. Came back, it was not, popular to be native and live in upstate New York, where the reserve, we call it a reserve, but it was Akwesasne-Mohawk territory, and it's partly Cornwall Island, Canada, and partly near Messina, New York, so Hogansburg. So it wasn't popular to be native. I mean, all kinds of stuff was going on in Canada, all sorts of stuff was going on in the US. So there was an element of people who moved away or were told that things would be better if they moved away. Go to the cities, whatever. And so I know a lot of people and a lot of lineage that has done that and had done that. So now you come to this place where, okay, well, who's Indian? How do they represent? Da, 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 da. All right. There are countless people that I know personally that are trying to find their roots and their lineage. Yet, because of this thing that I have a hard time with called blood quantum, okay, you have to prove that you're this or you're that. It doesn't matter that you've been told the stories all of your life. You've sat with your father, who would call his family his people. He didn't say they're my relatives, he said they're my people. Who would look at me and he would say, "Girl, I love you. You're precious to me." Now, you bring all of that forward, and you've got young people that that call me, that email, that text me. We're trying to research our roots, but we're getting talked to the hand because, who are you? Where did you come from? Oh, you came from Albany, New York. Well, what's that all? You need to be, a res Indian. You need to have this much blood. You need to have that much blood. And so there's a myriad of people who are not even willing now to fully go the distance to find out who they are, because they're being told they're not enough. And do you know what it feels like to have your own people tell you you're not enough? It's bad enough when you have everybody else telling you you're not enough. And you start believing that you're not enough. I've spent a lifetime thinking I wasn't enough, and you know what? I'm enough, just the way I am. But when you're in your 20s and 30s and you're like, this is all coming to you full front, and you're going, I want to know more, and you're having people tell you you can't. You're not enough. You're not enough. So you bring that into the film industry or into the entertainment industry, okay? And if everyone knows in this room, more than likely, all of the white actors that in the day were painted dark, and all that in order to be native, okay? All right. Well, now, you got native people who are auditioning for native roles and aren't getting them because they don't look Indian enough. All right, and you're going, excuse me? What does Indian look like to you? I mean, I'm standing here. I can remember very distinctly, I cannot tell you the casting office, but I went in for an audition one time, And one of the people said to me, one of the casting associates says, well, you don't really look native, you look more Asian, and and I'm very, anybody that spends time with me knows that I will go overboard to help and to be, kind, but there was something in me in that day just said, leave. Now, in this was back when you could still go into the casting office, you weren't doing tape submissions and all that. So, I went in, and I had already signed in. The casting director had actually asked for me, my agent, to send me, so she knew what I looked like, but this assistant didn't. And so I just said, you know what, obviously I'm not what you're looking for, so I think I won't waste your time or mine, I'm just gonna leave. And then she realized that I had already signed in, and they're gonna know that I had already signed in, and I decided that I left. So I'm on the highway, and I get a phone call from my agent, where are you? And I said, I'm on the highway, I'm headed home. And she, no, go back. And I said, well, can I tell you what happened? She said, I think I know, but you need to go back. So I did. It was a, very clearly it was a learning experience for this young woman, and I'm sharing that with you because this is what we deal with, all right? This is what we deal with. So if I don't look quite enough like what casting offices think I should look like in order to be native, it doesn't matter if I threw a 100% blood quantum down on their table, because they're not gonna hire me. Okay, so this is the part that is really, really, really frustrating to me right now. Not only just to me, but when I see young people that don't know fully their culture, and they're trying to find it, and they're being told no, you're not enough. And I'm like, oh, mama, the mama in me just, the mama bear in me just rises up, and I'm like, no, this can't be the way it is. So, with regard to the question you're asking, and I know I dragged on, God forgive me, but I find that even our own cultures have this thing that has been drilled into us, and it's a very colonial mindset, and those that live by it are going to always tell you that you have to be this much or you're not enough, or you have to do this or you're not enough. And it doesn't matter whether they're white, black, American Indian, it doesn't matter. If you got that mindset that this person isn't enough, it doesn't matter who you are. You're not going to be enough to whoever. So I'm stopping right here, and I'm saying I'm not playing that game anymore. I know who I am. I know I have worked hard to find out more about who I am, and I'm continuing to do more of that. I'm actually writing a one-woman play called, What My Father Told Me Is True. So the bottom line of it is you're talking about what do natives look like in film? Well, start letting us be there as we are, and you'll know.
70% of the audiences are interested in understanding the importance of increasing Native representation in Hollywood. But it sounds like there's a middleman there that doesn't get it.
It is. I have a very dear friend, and you might even know him. His name is Jonathan Miracle, and he has a band called Broken Walls. And he goes all over the world, with this bringing the culture of Native music. And this one time I was at one of his concerts, and Jonathan said, all right, he said, we got a time out here. He said, I want everyone who knows that they have Native, blood to stand up. I am telling you, you would have freaked out, because these people were everything from dark-skinned to light-skinned to red hair to blonde hair to dark brown but it was beautiful. It was so beautiful to see people who knew who they were, to be able to stand up and say, this is who I am, and I know this is who I am. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to keep banging the drum of you have to look like this in order to be, who you say you are? And that's, yeah, okay.
No, it's a great point, and I'd love to hear also her perspective. I think that one thing that's interesting that feeds into this conversation is so much of what people obviously know about American Indian history is what they see. You know, what you see out, and so much has been reflected in this time frame that, let's be honest, it wasn't a good time for Native Americans in the 1800s and the West. And the more we start to pull that out, like that's also reflected in the policy. That's also reflected in the public policy. Unfortunately, Colorado, we do not have Indian education as a requirement in public schools. That is happening right now. And this boarding school report, the more we see these films that are written by, starred by, have scores by Indigenous people, it puts us out there. Then people start going, oh my gosh, they're not a vanishing race. They're here. They're not a forgotten people. They actually hear, oh wait, that tribe that's the Ute Mountain Ute tribe is 7 hours away from Breckenridge. No, they're way down there. They have nothing to do with this. So why would I care what the tribe is going to name the Gover mountain range, or why I'm going to rename a peak called Mount Evans? Why does that matter to tribes states away, if not hours away? People don't understand that there's these huge massacres that are a fabric of states' history. That's our collective history. And I think until we start hearing that from an Indigenous voice, you know, it's so often, and I have so much respect for my friends and relatives and African American brothers and sisters around their effort and what they've, especially coming out of Black Lives Matter movement. But there's also, we need to have a very serious conversation. It's not okay to talk about red face, just as we can't talk about blackface. And I think that that's the process that we're going to start seeing once we start recognizing that. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel sorry for me. I'm not trying to get anybody to be sorry for what my people, where we are right now. I'm not looking for that. And my tribal leadership, I'm not looking for that at all. The acknowledgement piece is important because we won't be able to move forward together until we all have the base knowledge, right, about how we got to where we are right now, as a society, as a state, as a community, and what we can move in the future.
I guess to extend on the point of Carla-Rae with casting directors and stuff like that, I am also an aspiring music supervisor, and that's the person that licenses music and film and TV and ads and stuff. And so I think also for having these Indigenous storytellers, it's also important to have natives behind the scenes doing all of the extra work behind it, such as Indigenous music supervisors that know the artists, you know. There's a lot of Indigenous artists out there, and that's hence again why I promoted this festival, to uplift these artists on a bigger stage. The venue I work at can host 7,000 people. Granted, we didn't get that many this year, but we had about 1,200, and it was in partnership with Denver Indian Center. Again, because the whole point of it is to uplift our community and give back to it. So we raised a little under $2,000 for them, and I'm just hoping it can expand and grow, you know, as time goes on. But having these contemporary artists show that, hey, like, people that know their culture and those are reconnecting, there's a contemporary Native around, you know, there's millions of ways to be Native, in my opinion. And so showing that there's contemporary artists is that, you know, that's who we are today. You know, it's funny, during Native Heritage Month in November, right? All these companies and everybody are gonna start having events like, oh, it's Native Heritage Month, like we gotta bring in a dance group or a drum group, which is important, you know, land acknowledgements and such like that. But it's also like, okay, where's the representation of who we are today is the main thing that I'm striving to help shift, I guess, with this. And so, you know, at my school as well, a lot of us are urban as well, so there's so many students that come in that are trying to reconnect, and we have beading circles, we host a powwow every year on campus, and it's not to promote like pan-indigeneity, right, because again, there's different tribes that do different things, but it's just a way to feel community, a home away from home, especially for the students that come up off the reservation to these urban campuses. And I mean, I'll say it, CU Denver has lost like 30 to 40% of their Native student population on campus just because they don't have the resources to provide. There's no visibility, and that's where the invisibility comes from, right? Not having Indigenous education in our curriculum. And you probably know Rick Williams, but he's also working on shifting the education system in Colorado to incorporate and make it mandatory for students to learn Indigenous history, but also who we are today, right? Because you don't hear much about our history past like the 1900s, 1800s, you know? So I just think it's important to keep pushing that. You know, thank you guys for like paving the way for that, and that gives someone like me a chance for me and my friend here, Sadie, aspiring lawyer here, to keep making those changes in this society. So yeah.
Last night, the film Fancy Dance was centered around, well, there were several Native American issues addressed in that, but I think MIW and MIR was kind of the centerpiece of that. I think people didn't miss that because it kind of was wound up in the end of the film.
There's a water joke.
Is in 2020 alone, according to the National Crime Information Center, there were 5,295 reports of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls, which is, why is that happening? Why is that in Fancy Dance, it was like in the scenes where the FBI was talking, to Jackson's father, they were like, no, we just want to get Roki home. We're not worried about your sister and the fact that she's been missing for 2 weeks. What creates that environment? I mean, I guess the difference between the reservation, what's going on in reservations, and it seems like there's a disconnect between everything outside the reservation and everything inside the reservation.
I'm not saying you're I'm gonna let you say
That's
it.
it's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom's side's Diné, right? So she's grew up on the Navajo reservation. My son and Che, my grandma and grandpa, they still live there on the reservation. They have to drive, an hour to town every day. There's a gas station, and there's now there's a better health center, health clinic, which is good, and a new school. But it's just, you're few and far between from resources from like the police and everything, and I just think there's less inclination from people to search,
Outside of the reservation?
Yeah, for people to come in, and now there's the FBI task force, right, in the states surrounding it, but I haven't seen any significant change around it. My family personally, I know, 3-4 different people that are part of, who are MMIW, and women, Indigenous women relatives, they go missing like 10 times the national rate. And so it's just, I don't know exactly, we can do marches and, different task force things, but I haven't seen a bunch of significant change with it, and I'm not sure how that's going to change so fast in the future. And I'm sure Ernest can speak on the policy making side of it, but in the meantime, it's just devastating. So still, that's woven into intergenerational trauma, and that's something future generations are still going to have to deal with and overcome.
Well said. my reservation is 600,000 acres, mostly in Colorado. We have a small satellite community in White Mesa, Utah, in the Utah side. We also expand into northern New Mexico. We're right north of the Navajo Nation, which, to your point, is larger than the state of West Virginia. And reservation border town racism is alive and well. The nearest community where I grew up is called Cortez, Colorado. It's right before you get to the Four Corners. Cortez, Farmington, Gallup, Flagstaff, you know, they have big box stores, the Sam's Clubs, the Costco's. You know, that's where really supplies are still being done. I remember growing up and you know, vehicle sales the prices were increased when they found out that tribes were getting any like payments, or if the federal government and the tribe were working out some long issue and they said, oh, we screwed up, you were supposed to receive this, and then there's disbursement out of the tribe, you know, the prices go up. My home is about 10 miles from the Utah border, and on the way down this 2-lane road, there is, that goes both on the reservation and off. There's a certain point where there's a small sign, and it's probably about this high up from the ground, and it has a little plaque on the top that says start. And then about a mile down the road, on the side of the road, another stand that tall, and a plaque that says end. And that's supposed to tell our county sheriff's office where they don't have jurisdiction. So where they cannot pull someone over, where they can pull someone over. And for the longest time, my tribe was called the murder capital of Colorado in 2007 as the front page of the Denver Post. Our homicide rate was 50 times the national average and 20 times the state average, 50 times the national average. And they blamed it all on only two police officers, Bureau of Indian Affairs office. We're reliant upon the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We don't have enough revenue generated so we can fund our own police force, even though that's supposed to be a federal responsibility. That's a whole nother topic and panel. But the point is like that was what people were blaming. Of hey, you have this 2 officers for 600,000 acres, 2 communities that are spread out by 2 hours from each other. And so that's why the crime rates are so high. Oh, that must be why you're not gonna go look for her, or you're not gonna go look for him. Oh, then they're just out there, or you know, they'll come back. I mean, it's so many different stories, and to your point, so many different relatives, where it's so sad that it's just been something that we've lived with. And you know, you put it together with this jurisdictional nightmare in Indian country, meaning on reservation, off reservation. You add all this other, you know, stuff in there, and it does. There needs to be a way, and I'm glad that at least in Colorado we're heading down that path of trying to create an office. What it's going to come down to, in my personal opinion, is we're going to have to figure out a way where both the federal databases are working with state and tribal databases, and trying to change the tribal jurisdiction effort it's going to be a huge lift because they've consistently been underfunded for so long, and Bureau of Indian Affairs has, you know, it's the ongoing process. But so often we are left to our own family members to be who are the only ones to go out there and look, because everybody else can blame it. Oh, well, it's, you know, this or it's that, or, you know, point to that. So I think that at least in my experience, it's sad. And then when you're in a community that does not accept our Two-Spirit society, that's yet another added layer. Those LGBTQ plus community members and our Indigenous community are often referred to as Two-Spirit. And in a very conservative community where I grew up, those missing and murdered individuals, those rates were through the roof. And that was what was stark contrast and really sad.
Very simply, again, when you're talking about border people, so to speak, I had something happen to me back in 2002 when I was doing a lot of my research for my own family and culture. But I started working on Seneca-Mohawk territory with a youth group there. And they had an organization, and Willie and Sandy Jock were the people that spearheaded this, and very well known in that community. And I'm urban, so I would drive. At the time, I was living in New England, and I would drive 8.5 hours one way. So in a weekend, I'd go 16 hours drive up there to help them with this youth group. And this one particular weekend that I was there, we were running out of some art supplies. So I just got in the car, and I went into Messina, which is the bordering town to Akwesasne and to Hogansburg and all of that, and it's not native territory. And I got out of the car, and I was heading into the store to get these supplies. And these two guys, no joke, they were walking right toward me in the parking lot, both, like side by side, and they walked right into me, bumped right into me, and this is what they said: "Look at what they let off the res." And there was that kind of a, like I almost wanted to throw up, it was just that like they threw up on me and I wanted to clean it off, that kind of a thing. And now you have to understand, I was not a res Indian. I was an urban Indian. So I didn't really fully grasp, like even in the moment it was so disgusting, but I didn't fully grasp what was happening. But it shocked me, like it shook me to my core. And I went back, after I got the supplies, I went back and I told Willie about this and Sandy, and I was like, I was almost in tears because I said, I had no idea. I am so sorry this is happening. I had no idea. So with regard to the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls and relatives, there's a lot that's taken place up in Akwesasne, the Mohawk territory up there, where Cornwall Island, Canada, is part of Akwesasne Mohawk territory, and the Hogansburg area. There's been countless women that have gone missing, in that area, and it breaks my heart because of that one particular instance in my life where I understood how this is happening and why this is happening. And again, I mean, I'm not trying to bang this drum of, oh, poor us, because that's not where my heart is at all. I'm like, let's roll up our sleeves and duke it out a little bit sometimes. I want to just, but, and I like to calm down, Carla, But, the point is that, you can see that this is happening and what's going on in around the communities, and it comes from that holier than thou, for lack of a better term, mentality of, you're not enough. We can do what we want to you. We can say what we want to you. We can do what we want to you. End of story. And we're going to prove that we can do that. But it takes real strength to, steal a woman or a child. And you're going, wow, that's really bold and really, and you're like, what's the deal with all of that? So these are all things that we've all encountered at some point or another, and it does have to stop, and we're not going to stop saying it and doing something about it until it stops.
Just to add on to that real quick, I just wanted to share a few months ago for MMRW Day, May 5th, we had at my school a screening of Who She Is, the shorter film. But it touches stories on 4 MMIW women. Some were survivors, some did not make it. But the thing at the end, we had a Q&A in Wyoming. This was based in a lot of Wyoming Indigenous women in Ute, in Wind River. But there was a task force they had in place at one time, but it ran out of funding. So I also think that's a contributing factor where Native-led programs are trying to build themselves up, trying to do the work to find our relatives, but there's lack of funding. Again, that goes into the invisibility category with it as well. And yeah, so, and then also is one of the stories was a domestic violence case, so just like that's also part of MMIW, right, and that's lateral violence within our own community. And that comes from, again, being put onto a reservation that was meant to make you poor. So there's a lot of, again, intergenerational trauma, all of it coincides together.
So Ernest, when you and I were talking, you brought up something that I thought was really interesting, just maybe a little enlightened, is data sovereignty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think data sovereignty is maybe a newer term to folks that there's often all kinds of programs, projects going on in states where right now Colorado developing a climate resiliency map, right, to identify and combat climate change. And obviously climate change is impacting Indigenous communities as well. But oftentimes a lot of our tribal communities don't have the readily available funding that a lot of other programs around the states can do. So when we pull this information together and look at different impacts to tribal lands, which are technically not state lands, a lot of that information, the tribe should ensure that the tribe gets to say what they want their data used for. I remember when I was at the state, we would have to work with the Colorado Department of Human Services around foster placement, and Indian Child Welfare Act was obviously very, very important, and I think the creator that it continues to be important based on the last Supreme Court decision, and that being held up and maintained. But oftentimes, the numbers of households, so not over 90% of the population on my reservation, which is small, we're 2,000 member tribe, we have about 1,500 that live on the reservation. Over 90% meet or exceed the federal poverty guidelines. And oftentimes we're finding that local counties were using those numbers to get funds for different programs, for SNAP benefits, whatever, but the funds would never get to our tribal community. And so just in that case alone, and then moving forward, it's so important that now when you have Indigenous voices telling our stories, that we are the keepers of those. So much of our stories have been taken from us and exploited or shared against us, and they're out of our hands. And I think the data sovereignty movement is around having the tribe be in the driver's seat, having the tribe determine what information is shared, if it's for a report, if it's for whatever it might be. And one of the biggest questions I get right now, and maybe you all have read the book, I love the book, I've given the book out, but it's Braving Sweetgrass.
Yes.
You know, TEK, traditional ecological knowledge or traditional knowledges, is the buzzword right now across the board. And I give so much respect to Dr. Kemmer for her work and others that have been bringing this to light. But it's not like you can just walk up to a tribe or a tribal member and say, can you give me your tribal ecological knowledge? That's not a data file, that's not an email, that's not like something that everybody wants it in their report, right? They want us to come into communities and say, oh, this is how we use this, and you should use that, and you should. That's taking our data away from us. Mm-hmm. And so much of that has been done. And so data sovereignty is around a way of tribes actually holding on to that, keeping that. I was part of launching the state's first tribal charter school on my reservation during the pandemic. I don't encourage anybody to do that. Very, very hard. But now we have K through second grade, and we're teaching a culture, language, revitalizing language. That data should be there for those kids to learn, because so much of our Indigenous fluent language speakers are being lost. And now those kids are going home and teaching their parents our language. That's important. And that flower and that medicine. When COVID hit, that's what we had to do. We had to go back to our mountains and our forests to collect it because we couldn't go into the communities. We were restricted because of the protection. Anyway, so that's all that wraps into data sovereignty. And I think if you ever hear that term, it's probably going to be more closely related to TEK as you move forward. And just know that I'm glad you all that to know that it's not as easy. You shouldn't go up to anybody and just ask them that information. But over time, in building partnerships, perhaps, maybe, when you see that trust being built and those relationships being built, they will provide that information to you and say, yes, John, Susan, use this for your community. It should bring peace, it should bring healing, because that's what our stories should do. So that's kind of what things are to us.
Awesome. So is there anything you guys want to talk about? I mean, there's lots of questions, but is there anything in closing that you would like to address, or maybe a final statement?
I'm just happy to be here.
That's
I really
good
am.
enough.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to get new voice. And I'm glad to be in a room that I truly feel welcomes us. Okay, I'm done.
That was short.
You weren't expecting that.
No.
Okay, thank you everyone for having me today. And you know, it's so exciting to be in this era as sort of a younger student that's still learning a bunch of things and still learning stuff about my own cultures as well, as I am also Native. So, but very thankful to still have these teachings around and to have people willing to share it with me. Yeah, these films, it's for those, at least for this one with Aline Spears, so inspiring, and it's important for our youth to see that despite all of that trauma, we're still making it, we're still here, and that it's their time now to keep moving on, to keep pushing forward. And I'm sure most of you know, like, the next 7 generations ideology is Indigenous people are doing their best to leave the earth in a better place than how it was found. And with this sort of, as I would say, renaissance with arts and Indigenous creatives getting more involved in film and music and fine arts, I think that's just going to explode in a good way.
So, Ernest, before you get, I just wanted to mention that Erica Tremblay, the way Helen got on the panel was she met Erica in Santa Fe, and she said, "You got to get this girl on your panel. She's got a lot to say." And thanks to Erica, she wanted to be here. She just really is sad that she couldn't make it, but thank her for that.
Yeah. Well, Matriarchal Society is right. I have a lot of Indigenous women in my life that I'm able to look up to and that give me space to grow and share their knowledge, and don't see it as competition, but see it as a way to uplift our own community and ourselves. So hopefully I can pass that on as well to my younger siblings and cousins and all that, all my relatives.
It also means this is good. So this is good. You're right. This is good. This is a welcoming space. I would just encourage you all to, the success that this film has seen in this film festival, to inquire more about Indigenous films being a part of this and to have this community embrace that. We were talking about representation a little bit earlier. In Colorado, 2% of the state's population identifies as American Indian. That mirrors our national numbers. 2% of the United States population identifies as American Indian. And that is not enough to be able to change that public awareness. We need allies like you and your organizations and your programs and the people that you talk to. By just seeing these films, by being able to support our actors and actresses and music and genres, and going to check out Levitt Pavilion, which, by the way, I was there, and that was an amazing program that you put together. Blown away. It's the only Levitt concert I've been able to see, and I'll probably, that was good. Yeah, that was perfect. So support it. Support the community. We're looking for not just your partnership and support, but your allyship, and you telling your friends and relatives and everybody else that we need that, and to lift this conversation up higher. So just thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I hope this film festival can take advantage and continue to tell those stories and give you a voice. So, thank you.